Today's guest is Tom Young, and he's here to blow up the fantasy that software buyers actually know how to buy software. Spoiler alert, they don't. And most of them are just wandering their org, hoping someone knows how procurement actually works. Now, Tom believes it's our job to guide them, not just to sell to them. And he's got hot takes on sellers' dream plans versus real mutual action plans, and why the champagne, it should be popped at the go live, not the contract signing. And lastly, how to sniff out commission breath and kill it before it kills your deal. And yeah, the home team Cougars choked, but his bracket still cashed in with Florida. And that's what we call a mutual action plan for winning either way. If you laughed, if you learned, or you got fired up, hit us up on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Coach2Scale YouTube channel. Let's get loud about what great selling really looks like. Let's go. Welcome to Coach2Scale, how modern leaders build coaching cultures. I'm your host, Matt Benelli. Join me as we build a community of like-minded professionals who share the belief that effective coaching improves the performance of every team member. Our mission is to help leaders become better coaches. The Coach2Scale podcast is sponsored by Coachum, the world's first AI coaching execution platform that leverages evidence-based coaching to increase quota attainment. And with that, let's get started. I'm really looking forward to the conversation with today's guest for a bunch of reasons. Well, number one, he's truly and genuinely an excellent human being. He really is. But two, his balanced style is one that I've always admired. Never too high, never too low. Smooth operator. We worked together at Oracle where he cut his teeth at sales leadership and had a solid stint at IBM before that. So professionalism and tech sales runs in his veins. And for the past decade, he's been at BMC Software. He's currently AVP of Sales of the Americas. American by birth, Texan by the grace of God, coming to us out of Houston, Texas. Tom Young, welcome to Coach2Scale.
Well said. I'm a little bit nervous, though, after you claim that I'm a smooth operator. I'm sure we won't be a minute in before I start tripping over my tongue and prove that part of the intro false, but I appreciate it. That was very nice, Matt. Thank you.
Well, I do admire because, it's like a roller coaster sometimes. And when we work together, you're always that, like my blood pressure goes down talking to you, like just even keel, even when things are going great. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
It's you admire the traits others have that you wish you had. So that's one of them. Hey, Tom, before we get into it, big night in the Houston area, right?
It was as big of a city as this is. That kind of made everything feel like a small hometown. Unlikely comeback, but it's got everybody pretty excited. So we're excited for tonight for sure.
Yeah, and for those watching that may not know what we're talking about the Houston Duke comeback. The Houston's comeback over Duke and college basketball over the weekend. And as we're recording this, it's the night of the Final Four championship, Houston versus Florida. Tom, you going with Houston?
What? You trying to get people to come lynch my house or the tax assessor to increase my property rate? So here's actually true story. We do this like office pool, and none of us have time to really go think through a bracket too much. So we are just randomly assigned some teams. And then based on whether teams cover or not, the teams may trade hands. I actually stand to win this office pool if Florida wins. But I've got hometown kid playing with the hometown school. So I feel like I can't lose, but yes, just in case some locals are listening.
So for the record, even though there's money on the line, if Florida wins, you're going with Houston.
I'm going with Houston, but
okay.
I still expect to be paid if the people that are operating that game are listening.
Good contract, and for whatever it's worth, I just blindly pick some teams and have Houston winning the whole thing. So if that happens, that would be fun and absolute pure luck. So. Tom, there's a lot of myths in this business. We'll get right into it here. There's a lot of myths. And you've been around the block and you've heard, if not all of them, most of them, time and time again. What is one of those myths that's persistent in this realm of tech sales, coaching, leading, a myth that you believe is misguided or maybe even complete BS?
There are a lot of them out there that I probably still some that I will trip over and prove untrue over time. But one is a little bit timely, and it's that enterprise buyers or our big customers are good at buying enterprise software. When I was early in my career, I was taught a sales process, but we were also taught to go align to the buyer's journey. And I went in there thinking that this is what these people did, that they had a process. And I'm embarrassed to admit how recently it was that I realized that this was a myth. That this past year, I had an opportunity to be on the other side of the table and buy some tools and some services for my team. And I was an awful buyer. I didn't have a process. I kind of knew who our EB was. I certainly didn't know the decision committee and all the different people that needed to play a role in it. And I didn't know the funding allocation process. There was so much I didn't know. And it was also interesting to watch the different sellers approach me. We had one seller with a tool that we ended up using that really deferred to me and allowed me to go through my buying process. We had another one that took me through his process in a very high EQ kind of way. And although I have both tools in our environment now, there's one that's much more widely adopted, and one was a much better experience for me than the other. And it was the one that guided me through their process that was a better experience for me, instead of the one that left me to navigate the journey kind of on my own and he followed me. So I guess that myth, and that would be that our customers are good at buying software. Does that resonate?
Yeah, well, it resonates a lot, and I think that myth has been persistent for a long time, and even back when we were working together, and certainly before that, that myth held true. I have a couple of questions around that, but one is in 2025, we're still saying the same thing, and we still sometimes are slow to learn the lesson. Why, as sales professionals, do we continue to believe that our buyer knows how to buy our stuff?
And look, some do, right? Depending on where we engage, especially if we are in a situation where we engage with procurement. They know how to buy our stuff. They don't necessarily know how to do so and maximize the outcome for our champions or our EBs. But I think part of it is we don't know what we don't know. Not all of us have had an opportunity to be on the other side of that table, perhaps. Um, Another one is, especially for the earlier in career folks, we tend to defer to those with more experience. And oftentimes we assume that that experience includes buying these tools. They have all these tools, they have all of these different services at play in their environment. And we assume that this is what they do. We don't see what they do day to day, hour to hour. But the reality that I found, love your feedback, our champions, our EBs, they don't buy software often. And those that do don't have a clean, well understood or well defined process for doing so. Like my own experience, right? And I kind of knew who the EB was, and these are words I use all the time, but I still didn't know who that decision committee was. And we all know that now, what does Gartner say? There's like 7 to 12 different people in the decision committee for real enterprise software. It's hard.
Well, you brought up you mentioned something that alluded to what you just said. There's a bunch of cooks in the kitchen when it comes to buying software, and you said something to the effect that you didn't know who all the buyers were when you were buying those tools. They come out of the woodwork, don't they?
They do. Some don't like to come out until after you've made the decision, so they can point at it and say, "Ooh, didn't you know you had to consider these other things?" And those are my least favorite. But then, yes, as you're going through it, even when you get to the real EB inside your own organization, they're going to ask, well, did you go talk to this other person that you didn't know existed and needed to get this approval from this committee that you didn't know was a thing? And
Yeah. So I mean, we've had similar backgrounds for a long time. I mean, at Oracle, IBM, BMC, these are larger organizations, and my friends and colleagues at smaller ones say the same thing. When you are, let's say, in a sales leadership position, and you're not always you're not buying stuff,
No.
unless you're at an earlier stage company. I mean, 62 and a half quarters at Oracle. I never bought anything. I,
Huh.
uh, you know, I, I influence things. I mean, I remember with, Mike Myers and bringing Sandler into Oracle back in, it was 2002. Um, but I thought I was just had to go to my boss and say, "Hey, we want to do this," and it would be done. That's when I found out all the people that came out of the woodwork and wanted to have questions answered that I didn't even think of or know existed. And that was just I was just the I guess the champion,
Hmm.
or a coach. I wasn't even a champion. I think I was like be considered a coach at the time. And so it's an interesting point. There's a phrase out there that says, people often sell the way they buy. And I wonder if how much water that holds, especially when, as a leader, you're not buying technology or services for the organization.
That's interesting. I hadn't spent time thinking through that. Although my own experience would suggest that companies are wise not to let people like me buy. Um, and I'm not sure that I would make a good customer for somebody or not. I think I'm stereotypical in one degree, that I'm not sure I even understood what I really wanted. I knew the outcome,
Right.
but I didn't go through my own process to really define the required capabilities or really have a well thought out problem statement. And I needed somebody else to help me with that. And then you brought up the budget thing. Maybe that's another myth we could have started with, is that discretionary budget doesn't exist, especially nowadays, right? There's so many different people that have to weigh in. We don't have the discretion to go spend those dollars even when they are there. And that's something that I didn't understand fully enough until
Yeah.
now.
I always thought that question was a tough one. Do you have the budget for this? Like, no.
That's right.
Very few. You got to go fight for the pile of cash that might be there, and there's 10 other priorities that might be in front of it. But I want to go back to something that you said, Tom. You said I think you bought two different tools, or you
Mhm.
went through two different processes.
Right.
And the tool that was more or better adopted by your organization was the one where the salesperson, led kind of immerse themselves in your process and understood your journey. How does the I can see why that would be a better buying process, why you would be more inclined to go with that type of solution, more connected to that salesperson because he or she made you feel heard and better through the process. But how did that manifest itself to be better uh, adopted within the organization based on the process that you went through?
Yeah, it's interesting. The two processes that these sellers followed were different. In one, you had the blind leading the competent. And that was when the seller let me lead my buying cycle because I didn't have one, right? I was blind, I was ignorant to it. And he was very experienced and I thought competent, but it didn't do me any good because I still had to go create this process and navigate it and identify it myself and define it myself. The other seller had this process where he walked me through the engagement cycle. Here's generally what we find. And when he knew I was struggling with this decision committee and all the different people, he said, well, here's usually what we find in the process. Who do you think those people might be for you? He just simplified it. It was almost like color by numbers. And he let me go color it in, but he gave me the boundaries for it. He told me where to go look. And then oftentimes he'd ask, hey, you mind if I just go figure that out for you? I have a couple of people I think in your company I can go call. And he would bring those names back to me and say, hey, I already talked to these people. And I think that's what led to the easier adoption and consensus, is that he got to the EB. He got to those other decision people. He identified other champions and coaches that were critical to buy-in throughout the process. So we had more momentum behind that because he had his engagement process. He got us to buy into it and he went and executed, instead of this other person that had the unfortunate experience of trusting me to go lead something that I didn't fully know how to go do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna spit it back to you to make sure I understand, because I think this is really powerful. We've already established what's well known, which is that there are a lot of stakeholders involved in the buying process when you're buying, software, and that even you as the buyer internally, companies that were selling to you, you didn't know who all the players were in your own company.
Right.
This salesperson did their job. He or she knew that there were multiple people involved. It wasn't just Tom Young. And he or she navigated the organization, perhaps with your help, to talk to those other folks, uncover who those other folks were, and come back to you with, hey, I spoke to the economic buyer. I spoke to other key stakeholders. Here's what they like. Here's what their concerns are. Let's talk about where we go from here, and let's build something together. Am I teeing that up too nicely?
No, I think it's spot on, and it really helped inform the way I had to be leading my sellers and helping them think about this, right? And the result, we go back and looking at our deals, and maybe it's some confirmation bias, right? Since I was really struggling with this idea of whether or not our buyers know how to buy software, we'd go back and look at deals. And those where we didn't take charge, they had a longer average sales cycle, meaningfully so, right? A disproportionate amount of them were lost to no decision or just kind of died on the vine. Where we had sellers that would really go and sell an engagement process and drive this as a consultant or a coach or a guide for our customers, shorter sales cycles, higher win rates. And it seems that there's something there, right? So because of this experience, we're getting more explicit about training our sellers to own this process, right? Act as a guide throughout this journey with our buyers, right? And all of the old axioms apply. It still has to be about the customer. It has to be about their experience and their outcome. It can't be, commission breath driving this thing. But we have to own that engagement model, right? Go sell them on the engagement model. Our engagement model has helped thousands of other prospects and customers make fully informed decisions. Often that fully informed decision is that it's not a good fit, and that's okay. But you go sell this model, and here's what it looks like. At these different points, you'll get to decide, do we continue? Is this the right fit? Do we need to open it up? But walk them through it and get buy-in. And then when we start to see deviation from that process, we can call them out on it. So we've gotten to be a lot more intentional about owning that process, selling the engagement model, and then helping the customers understand themselves. We have to ask those questions in the process that they ought to be asking themselves. Maybe challenge some assumptions, bring some insight. Discovery becomes critically important, but help them understand that journey that we're about to go on together.
I love that question. I love that point you just made. We have to be asking the questions that they should be asking themselves, but maybe are not, and often are not. And that's the consultative approach, right? It's asking questions, and it's the same type of questions they should be asking themselves. So you talked about there's longer sales cycles. My words, if the salesperson's not controlling the process. But oftentimes, Tom, doesn't controlling the process get confused with when are you going to sign this deal? Is it going to come in this month? Versus the asking the questions and guiding them along the way. There's a difference, isn't there?
It feels like there's a big difference. One of the things that came to my mind when you're asking that is, whose process are you trying to control, right? And when you're worried about your commission timing, you're controlling the sales process. When you're worried about go live celebration, Now you're trying to help manage the customer's process. And maybe control isn't the right word, Matt. Maybe it really is guiding them and coaching them. Um, and there's different elements. One of the things we'll remind our sellers from time to time is the buyer might own the budget, but we have to own the process and they have to buy into it. Right. So we own that process. Here's the engagement model. We sell it up front. If they don't like something about it, well, let's collaborate on that. What pieces need to shift later or come in sooner? What pieces need to go away or come in? And we have to mutually decide, is this still likely to lead to a good outcome for the customer, right?
What's an example?
Of what might come in and out or move forward and back in the process.
Yeah. What's an example of getting buy-in or not getting buy-in, like doing it the right way versus the wrong way as you're describing it?
But if you're asking what does it feel like or sound like when you're talking about the engagement model, at some point you'll be trying to identify pain in a customer, trying to figure out if there is a need. Once you establish that there could be a need, it's sitting down with a customer or prospect, a Mr. or Mrs. Prospect. We've been having this conversation. It feels like there's something here, right? We've talked about your current state and the negative implications, or we talked about where you're trying to go and what that's going to mean for you. Do you agree that this is worth pursuing? Hopefully you'll get a yes. If so, the good news is, I don't know how many times you've been through this journey. Here at our company, we've been through it thousands of times. So we've come up with an engagement model that helps our buyers make these fully informed decisions. If you're open to it, I'd like to walk you through it and see if you think it'll make sense for you and is it can help you to come to a good outcome. And by the way, oftentimes all it does is help our customers realize there's not a great fit here. And I want you to know that's okay. Right? You walk them through it and then each of the different steps, right? We'll go through this investigation and you try to use their words, not ours, right? It's not discovery unless you want to make it a customer sounding thing, but we'll go through this investigation and kind of an ideal state vision casting. We'll go through then technical validation, and then we'll stop and we'll see, do we want to move forward? And if so, it'll probably be with financial legitimization or maybe some sort of demo, right? And then you get buy-in as you go through it, and et cetera, et cetera. Does that address what you were looking for, Matt?
Yeah. I wanted an example of how it sounds to get buy-in. And that's what you just did. And, I love the way that sounded is, yeah, no one's going to say, no, Tom, don't tell me about the process. Don't tell me what a lot of other clients liked.
Mm-hmm.
Just, 95% of the time, you're not going to hear that. They're going to say, yeah, sure. Walk me through it. That doesn't mean they're buying anything. To your point, as you walk them through it, they might say, oh yeah, we're not, like, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
We're not ready to do that yet. Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about that. When will you be ready? What would it take? Right.
Wouldn't the seller prefer to know that early, right? Rather than, well, I thought we were heading to a demo. I didn't know what was required there. But also what we do sometimes get mad is, don't worry about it. We've got a process.
And then what do you say?
Well, and then you have an opportunity to go, oh, awesome. That makes me feel so much better already. Hopefully not with as much sarcasm as I just had. Help me understand your process, right? And then if they can really define it, more power to them. More often than not, they're going to be missing key elements. Matt, that actually sounds like a well thought out process. But as I reflect back on some of the experiences I have, we generally see this element. I didn't catch that. Do you think that'll play an important role here? Hey, usually these types of people end up weighing in our processes, but I didn't hear that. How do we reconcile that here? Right? And you start challenging them and you start taking over and becoming that consultant.
I was trying to think of the word that came to mind when you were just walking through that. And the word is challenge. So you filled in the blank for me there. Thank you. That not everyone does that comfortably or reflexively. But it can be learned. What's the role of the leader in helping the sales team understand that when buyer walks you through their process and there are gaps, instead of going to complain about it to your manager and your peers, it's better to challenge the prospect that the right way. Like, is there a role of the leader in doing that?
I'd like to think so. And there's probably a few different answers that I might be able to come up with. I'm sure you'll be able to come up with a handful of more. But one, it starts with the mindset that the seller is on equal footing as the buyer, regardless of who you're calling on. It's the CIO, it's the CFO, it's the architect, it's an admin. This is a conversation of peers, right? And then we have to make sure that our sellers know why we have confidence in saying that. Even though early in career sellers here have access to our win stories, they have access to the IP learned through thousands of successful customer implementations. And if we've done onboarding correctly, then they understand what an ideal customer profile looks like, what the ideal engagement model looks like, and they have the confidence to eject when it's not a good fit in either of those things. So it's got to start with the mindset that this is a conversation amongst peers. I would probably tweak that as the seller matures. Actually, it's not a conversation amongst peers. You're the expert, they're the novice. They might be the expert in the technology, in their industry, in their niche. You're the expert in evaluation cycles.
Yeah, but regardless of the term ascribed, expert or a leader, whatever, what you're talking about is this equal business stature,
Mm-hmm.
right? And oftentimes as sellers, don't we put that buyer on the pedestal and we subordinate ourselves to them in the process? Would that be fair?
I certainly did often.
Yeah.
I think you're spot on. And I think it's also incumbent upon us to help our reps understand the reality of the buyer's job, and not just their day to day in terms of the task, but what it's like to try to get a deal done. It goes back to giving them that confidence, but we have to help our sellers understand where these things, when cycles get sideways and go wrong, why is it? And what are the things that we can do to try to mitigate that risk? For example, we see a lot of our cycles end in no decision. A book came out not too long ago, The Jolt Effect, that goes into this in great detail, but oftentimes it's because the buyer just can't develop the confidence to make a decision. They have all the information they need, probably way too much information. They might even really believe that what we're offering is going to be beneficial to them, but they just don't have the confidence to pull the trigger because buying enterprise software is risky, right? It's perceived often by buyers as potentially career limiting if they go get this thing wrong. And if we don't help our buyers develop the confidence at that point in the cycle, then we're at risk of this no decision or the elongated cycle. So back to what can we do as leaders? We have to help our sellers recognize that when it's happening. We have to help them understand, we used to talk about this, address the rider and the elephant, right? One of the books you turned us on to long ago, Switch, talks about, as much as we like to think we're all logical, rational beings, there's this emotional side that we just can't get away from. And if we spend all of our time as sellers focused on the logical side to the exclusion of the emotions, we're not going to make much progress. If we just go after the emotions but don't have the legitimization and the logic, it's going to be hard to gain consensus. Got to address the rider and the elephant. Quantifying the cost of inaction, creating a clear path to measurable value. Customer stories go a long way here. And we spend a lot of time making sure our sellers are powerful storytellers, hoping that our prospects can see themselves in those stories. So not sure if I got too far away from the point of your question, but hopefully that helped.
No, it's great. And love the analogy, the reference to the rider and the elephant. Yeah, that goes way back. But Chip and Dan Heath's book, Switch, is where that came from, right? And they did a phenomenal job. And right, a rider, an elephant, and emotion and logic. And then when you map on, personality styles or leadership styles, whether it's DISC or blind spots or like some other assessment tool, then you start to figure out who your buyer, are they more emotionally driven or logically driven, or like which buttons do you want to push,
Mhm.
right? Because I mean that it's
The complicating factor there, though, is you have your buyer, but then you have everybody else that they need to go win over. And we have to make sure that there's enough for each of those different personality types that we might encounter in that story. Because the sad reality, we seldom get an opportunity to be in front of every member of that decision committee.
yeah.
But we need to make sure that our story gets there and that it's told in a way that's going to resonate. And that's where champion building and building the mantra value framework all becomes so critical. You've got to enable your customer to go tell that story when you're not there, because that's really where the deals are won or lost, I think.
And Tom, you're a big believer in coaching and developing and achieving success through others as a senior leader. Oftentimes, the gravitational pull is for leaders to say, "Step out of the way. Let me do it. Let me show you how it's done," which maybe we can agree that robs the seller of the learning in terms of going through that process. What how do leaders create self-sufficient salespeople? What are some of the tools in the toolbox in terms of the cadence, the operating framework in terms of how leaders lead that they can leverage to equip their people to be better, show up better in front of their clients?
Well, it's a lot easier for some of us when we're surrounded by people that are just flat out better sellers than I ever was. So it's easy for me to get out of the way, no doubt. So I think then I'm challenged to find a way to create a safe environment for my sellers to come and role play that type of stuff with either my first line managers or me or others. But we've got to make sure that they have that opportunity for those words to come out of their mouth in a safe environment, fine tune it before they go sit in front of their customer. There's different ways we do that. Uh, we can do that through deal coaching, QBRs, there's forecast skills, all these different places where we talk about, instead of just talk about the deal, talk about as a result of where we are, what do we need to go do next? What is that going to sound like? What outcome do you have in mind? But then there's also some tools we ask the sellers to use as they're engaging with their customers. We talked about the lack of clean, well-defined processes for our buyers across their journey. It underscores the importance of something like a mutual action plan, right? Having a map to help guide them throughout it, with the emphasis on the M. It's got to be mutual. I've seen so many examples where we basically send over the things we need to qualify our deal, right? And when we just expect to get the PO, that's not a mutual action plan. That's a seller's dream plan. In order for it to be mutual, we need it to incorporate all the different elements. And this is where we get to guide them. Right? Hey, I'm sorry, as I look through this, I realize I don't see where funding gets allocated here. You said you have budget, but is there something you have to do to go, you know what, in looking through all this, I don't see where security is going to come in and approve that this tool being brought into the environment. We generally see that happen here. How does that fit into what you're trying to do? By when does this have to happen to give you enough time to test it before you go live? Hey, you know the big thing we're missing here, Matt? I don't see when we're going to come out here and celebrate the go live. Can we plan that for this date? And that's one of my personal pet peeves is when the mutual action plan ends on the last day of the quarter with PO received as the final action. It's got to be more meaningful to the customer. So maps become a big piece of it, helping our team understand upfront contracts. Now, we've given our team, we talked about the importance of being a powerful storyteller. We can't script the stories for our team, but we can give them a framework. I'm a big believer in frameworks. So we've given them a value framework for how to tell that story, right? And other customer stories. So I think whether
let me jump in there. Let me jump in, Tom. So I love what you said there about the difference between a mutual action plan and a seller's dream plan. But very specifically, the better mutual action plans end with something like the date for the go live celebration, not the date the contract was signed.
Right.
And so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I just think about that. If I'm the buyer and whatever I'm buying, it talks about celebrating the outcome that I want, whatever that outcome is, going live, achieving whatever it is, versus me just giving you money and signing off and never seeing you again. Like that has to inspire more confidence and respect from the buyer. Would that be fair?
I certainly hope so. I think it is fair. As you were saying that, I was reminded, I'm not going to get it right, but words can't cover up your true intent, right? True emotional sincerity is hard to map. And I think you taught us, or you brought in Sandler that taught us about commission breath, right? When it becomes so off-putting to our customers when we're clearly just there to maximize the size of our deal and commission, and it's all about us. If the goal here is to develop a trust-based relationship, it's going to be hard to do that if our customer can't get close to us because of that commission breath. So then in keeping with that, our actions have to match our words. And we can talk about how committed we are to their outcome all day long. But if in the documentation we send over, it suggests that the end of our relationship occurs at the signing of the PO, there's not a lot of integrity there, right? So we have to make sure that everything we do and say, the customer feels like their outcome is what's important. And shoot, that could have been another myth that we started with, Matt. I started this business thinking that our job was to go sell the product. Our job is to ensure the outcome, right? Yeah. That's how we get the follow-on business. That's how we get money growing on the referral tree. That's where good things really happen, is when we ensure that outcome happens. So helping our reps have the right mindset that we're here to sell and deliver an outcome to our customers, I think make sure that these little things like the end date of a map carry through. Does that resonate?
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. Yeah, look, we've all made those mistakes, but yeah, we realize no one cares about the product they're buying. They're not buying product; they're buying an outcome. And how can we figure out what those outcomes are, help them achieve them, and celebrate those, not just the signing of the contract. Tom, you talked about structure and the believer in frameworks. Where does the one-on-one fit into that? That meeting, whatever it is, weekly, periodically, between the manager and the rep, or the second line manager and the first line manager. What is the role of the one-on-one in creating a successful sales organization?
Yeah, my view on that is kind of, maybe I'd be giving myself too much credit if I said matured. Let's just agree that it's changed over time.
And your wife's not listening. Your wife's not listening. It's okay.
Yeah, she'd be the last one to ever agree that I've matured at all. Look, one-on-ones are critical. I used to confuse the issue, though, and try to do too much in the one-on-ones. And it was for, I think, well-intended reasons. I used to be so concerned about maximizing my seller's customer-facing time, or even my first-line manager's rep-facing and customer-facing time, that I wanted to shrink the amount of internal stuff we did. So for that reason, I would take the one-on-one and I would do forecast, I would do development, I would do key updates. I would do everything. And I tried to do it in this half-hour call. My thinking's changed now. Each of those elements are important enough for their own meeting, are important enough to have their own dedicated time. And while it might be coming at the expense of some customer-facing time, I think that if done right, all of them can be rep growth opportunities, right? If we run our forecast in the right way, it can have some elements of business acumen, deal coaching, and perspective but it also frees up a more intentional one-on-one. I encourage my first line leaders to have weekly one-on-ones with them, with their reps, separate from forecast calls and everything else. I also encourage them to be pretty intentional with what they want to do there. I have a structure that I follow for my one-on-ones. I don't mandate that my people follow it too, but I follow it often enough to where I think it becomes an unconscious skill for them. But it's just a way to make sure that I'm covering the things that are important to the business, getting close to their business, and putting me in a position to celebrate what they're doing and be aware of what's going on, and still hold them accountable to things that they told me were important before. So I've got a structure I follow there.
Do you mind sharing it?
Don't mind at all. So I always ask the team to start with bright spots. Give me a couple things that happened over the course of the last week or 2 weeks since we've met that I can celebrate with you. And the intention there is maybe twofold, Matt. One, as a first line leader, I found that everybody was bringing me their problems. And to some degree, that's okay, right? The minute they stop bringing you your problems, you're really in trouble.
Right.
But it's set for a negative conversation. And I just felt burdened with so much problems and confirmation bias. You see what you expect to see, and you see what's around you all the time. So all I ever saw was problems. So I wanted to change the tone of the conversation. So I wanted to start on a high. And it got my team thinking about the good that was in their business. And confirmation bias, again, you see what you look for. They started seeing all the good they did. So it changed the tone of the conversations. But the second reason I like starting with the bright spots is part of my job as their leader is to evangelize the good stuff that they're doing and go get our unfair share of resources, right? Whether it's merit and budget increase or raise promotion type of stuff, or just champion my people. That's easier to do when I'm aware of the goodness that's happening in their business, right? If our CRO calls or whatever, I can say, oh, here's what's going on. And it's the goodness from that team. So we start with the bright spots. Then I'll usually go to, here's the 4 things I wanted to talk about. I won't talk about them in detail. It's, I need to give you update A, update B, want to ask you about C. Matt, are there any other items we should add to that agenda? You'll say yes, F, G, and H. Great. Hey, we'll come back to those in a minute. Before we get into that, last time we spoke, you said you needed to accomplish these 3 big things. How did those go? Right. So there's a little accountability. We'll get into the agenda, come up with other action items. And then the last thing I'll always ask is, between now and the next time we talk, what are the 3 big rocks? What are the 3 things that have to happen in your business in order for you to feel like you're moving things forward? And then, time permitting, ask what's coming up on your calendar that I should be aware of, right? But just a way that I can come back to our next one-on-one and hold them accountable and understand where they're spending their time.
Yeah. Daisy chaining those goals. What were the big rocks that you accomplished last week that you set out to do? Update on those, and then kind of going forward, and you just pick up on that every week, right? You start to see patterns after only a few weeks.
You do. And sadly, right, a lot of this came about or was reinforced during COVID, when we couldn't go get the windshield time that you and I were accustomed to growing up in the business. Felt like I was drifting away from the business. So a few of those questions about the bright spots, big rocks, it helps me feel like I'm closer to the business and have my finger on the pulse of what's going on a little bit better.
I want to ask, I want to tap into your wisdom here. So I'm going to ask you to give advice, broad-based advice here. I live out in the mountains these days, and I was on a ski lift yesterday or on Saturday, and with an old friend and Oracle colleague, someone you probably don't know, but he had, his kids are my kids' age, 24, 25-ish. And they were there with their friends, and a few of their friends were in the business. And we're riding up the chairlift, and one of the younger people said, this woman, she's 5 years in sales, something like that, and she said, "Yeah, my manager never gets on goes and sees customers, or is never on the call with customers. I can't think of one customer of mine that she's been on, and she's one of the top performers. She's been there for a few years, And so I hear this enough. I wouldn't say a lot, Tom, but I hear it enough. What do you say to that newly minted leader, frontline leader, who may not have had that behavior modeled for them, where they should, they get in front of customers, they talk to customers, and they're just running a back office job in a sales organization?
Was it too harsh to say, I wish you the best of luck in your next career? Like, I just don't see a
No.
role for a sales leader whose natural instincts isn't to go engage with a customer or to ride shotgun with their seller. So I think that's where it would start, is help me understand how you're running your team, right? One of the things that I don't see in what you just walked me through is, um, I don't think I would use the term ride time anymore, but is field visits with your rep or customer calls with your rep if it's an inside type of role. Is that missing? Help me understand why that's not a bigger part of your plan. And then walk them through my perspective on why I think that's so important. Right? One, we're here to help the reps grow. In order for them to be successful, we have to watch them in the wild. We have to see how they're engaging with their customers. Most of our reps, man, it's like standard interviews, they're smart enough to know what it is we want to hear. But what they tell us happened and the way it actually went down are usually maybe not miles apart, but they're definitely not carbon copies. Yeah. And if we aren't able to hear the way that it's going down, we're not in a position to better coach them. So I would challenge the person on how they're coaching their team if they aren't seeing them in live action in the wild. Second, I would be really concerned and curious about the seller that's lost the passion for direct customer engagement.
Right.
So there'd be concern about fit.
Yeah. No, but then it begs the question, well, what's the second line leader doing? And,
sure.
Do they, yeah. So
there is an opportunity, right? If for some very valid reasons that frontline manager isn't the right person to be doing that, okay, who in and around our leadership team can and should be doing it if there really is a legitimate reason, but it has to be happening from someone, right?
Right. Well, what the answer is going to be to the question, something to the effect of, I don't have time, right? We hear that. We hear that time and time again. It's not a topic for, we could go down.
We just freed up a lot of your time.
Yeah. We'll release you back into the economy. Mm-hmm. So switching gears a little bit, Tom. So I use the phrase painful lesson, but it's not like blood has to, get spit out here, or, there needs to be bumps and bruises. But what's a painful lesson, aha moment, lesson learned that you learned in this crazy business that kind of shaped how you, changed how you approach things, and in hindsight, you're glad you did?
Oh man, that could be a long list. We probably could have made an entire conversation about that. You're just thinking about, so I guess since we're just coming off a conversation about processes and coaching, one of them would be that the effectiveness of any process is determined at least as much, if not more, by the commitment of the participant as it is to the wisdom of the process, if that makes sense. And what that means to me really is, too often I've over-optimized the process instead of the important part of getting our team to buy in from it, right? If the effectiveness of that process is really going to hinge on the commitment of the participant, then I need to make sure to explain and sell the why, not just the brilliance of the process, but the why and the desired outcome to the team. Does that make sense, Matt?
100%. It's why are we doing this? I mean, that comes up time and time again in employee engagement surveys, exit interviews, all different kinds of conversations. It's the importance of what not just what we're doing, but why are we doing it? And, how do we know what's the champagne test? How do we know we're successful?
So that was something that really stood out for me. And certainly there's others I don't know if we want to go into, but early in my career, I ignored the early warning signs of misalignment or poor performance. And that's not doing anybody any favors, right? It not only prolongs the issue, but it runs the risk of spreading it amongst the others.
Yeah,
Um,
for
I guess
sure.
another one, probably the most important one, you have to make time for yourself. You can't always allow other people to set your priorities. Whether that's making time for yourself to reflect, to learn and grow, to actually do the work, or simply balance your health, right? Physical, mental, relationships, everything else. I had a CEO a long time ago was bold enough to get on stage at SCO and share a spider diagram of the 8 different things he tracks to see if his life was in balance. Everything from work performance, social relationships, hobbies. There's a spiritual element, family relationships. I might have already said. I think it was about 8 of them, and that just stuck in my mind about how he has to be intentional carving this out. This was a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, um, but that underscores lessons I've had to learn a couple times about the importance of being balanced and making time for yourself.
Mm. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, if you're not balanced, you're not showing up at work and for your people and your clients the best that you can. Um, we didn't always know that, or it wasn't always uh, a lot of attention was not given to that, perhaps in the old school as much as it should have been. So, Tom, you've been at BMC now, I think over 10 years, 10 or 11
By that,
years.
yeah.
Um, So, for those who don't know, what does BMC do, broadly speaking, and what do you love about what you're doing there today?
Yeah, unfortunately, we might be too well kept of a secret. We've been around 40 years or so, but we're a software company. Uh, I guess the best way to say it would be focused on simplifying and modernizing the way our customers deliver outcomes and services across their business. Look, man, we all know technology, innovation, changing customer expectations, they can be great opportunities for highly agile companies, or they can be huge stumbling blocks for companies that aren't able to quickly respond to those changes. So we help companies be more agile by doing things like uh, operationalizing innovation and AI. We streamline the data ops processes across their hybrid environments. Um, but ultimately, what we try to do is help companies ensure that whatever's most critical to their business, the outcomes and services that they depend on or that they deliver to their customers, are delivered reliably across their company, regardless of the underlying tech stack.
And what do you like? Think about. I think you're going into a new year right
Mhm.
now. What are you most excited about working with the company and with your team?
A couple different things, maybe. So, first, about the company, right? We're in a market that matters and it continues to grow. We're solving problems for companies that are doing great things in the market and in the world. Being able to be part of that journey is pretty cool. And the technology that we provide really does shape how our customers deliver this innovation that matters to them. So, being part of that is certainly exciting. A little more personally to me, though, I'm excited to continue this growth journey. The growth that I've been able to experience personally since joining BMC 10 years ago has been phenomenal. Everything from how to sell, how to lead and coach. Yeah, it's the growth that I've experienced. It's the people here that have helped me experience that growth. That's what's providing, I think, the most excitement to me.
Well, that growth mindset is something that stays with you for hopefully forever, right? I think you were always like that. When I remember working together, and I'd like to think I was like that too. And you're always curious. You always want to learn, and that type of approach, that mindset, it's not instilled in everyone, and a lot of times there's part of that you're just born with, but oftentimes the behavior is modeled for you along the way. So this is the Coach2Scale podcast. We bring on guests who care about coaching and developing others. And again, usually if you care about that stuff, you had something positive modeled for you. Who is somebody whose coaching has had a significant influence on your career?
I've listened to enough of your episodes to know that this was coming. And on one hand, I was looking forward to it because there's awesome people. On another, the list was too long to walk you through. But
Well, that's a good thing.
it is a good thing. I've been incredibly blessed to be surrounded by a lot of great leaders. The person who first brought me into the business, hired me out of college, a guy named Doug Long, into IBM, showed me you can be a man of faith and high moral character and still be a highly effective sales leader. And for somebody early in career to see that those two things can live together was really meaningful to me. And people that at Oracle as well, right? Jason Little showed me how to balance a data-driven approach with an empathetic, highly EQ-driven approach, and that those two things can live together. Dane Soleil, one of the most effective leaders I've worked for, showed me how to establish a vision for an organization and create belief and passion across the team.
Absolutely.
Really with people. The guy I work for now, a guy named John Harmon, you talked earlier about the importance of adapting your style to meet the personalities of those around him. And I haven't seen anybody more gifted at doing that than John, and meeting people where they are and helping them grow, incredibly authentic while still being strategic and not afraid to demand the best. But the most authentic, humble leader I've ever worked for, I think, Matt, was you, and gave me an incredible foundation for leadership, for a style that leaves a legacy. Just thinking about the leaders that used to sit and kind of learn from you, looking at the leadership coaching tree that you've left behind, is pretty impressive. And I think evidence of what a great role model you were to so many of us. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I have to cut that piece and send it to my kids. They're not gonna. They won't believe that. But you've mentioned some great folks. I know Jason a little bit. His brother Scott. They were great leaders. Dane, of course. We both worked with him and love Dane. And it's great that you're working for someone today that you think so highly of. It's rare to have continuity in leaders where you're learning something from and that you look up to. So really, really good. Tom, last question. Who's your favorite coach? And I'm thinking like a little bit, high, like a name a lot of people would know. Not everybody, but a lot of people would know. And what traits about that coach do you admire?
I don't know if this one falls in the category or not, but it's a name that a lot of people should know. It's a college basketball coach named Buzz Williams. I wouldn't have known who he was, except he happened to be coaching at my alma mater at A&M up until very recently. Broke my heart, and he's going somewhere else. But what stood out to me about Buzz Williams is that he doesn't just coach the player, he coaches the person. And what that means to me is it's easy to coach, whether it's the game of basketball or whatever the sport or activity is, and try to make the person better at performing that. That's different than coaching the person in a way that leaves them not just a better athlete or basketball player, but a more well-rounded person. For him, it wasn't just about the wins and losses, it didn't seem. It was about making a real impact on those around him. And that just resonated to me. But even his style of play on the court was pretty impressive. His team always controlled the controllables, right? The hustle and the heart. He was famous for his teams leading in categories like offensive rebounds and loose balls won. That doesn't have anything to do with skill and ability. That has to do with want to. And I think any coach that can tap into the want to is doing something pretty special.
Yeah. And you said it didn't appear that he cared as much about or was solely focused on the wins and losses. And I think we could both agree that he absolutely was focused on the wins and losses, but it's how he went about it ensured that he got more wins than losses. And I think that's what's cool about people like Buzz. I got a question. As a Yankee Northerner from Boston, Texas is hook 'em. The Aggies are gig 'em, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does gig 'em mean?
Oh Lord. So look, there's a long version and a short version, and I'll spare
Let's go
you
with
the
the short
long
one.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll spare you the long version. Uh, Gigging refers to going out and gigging frogs. It came about years, decades ago when A&M was gearing up for a big game against TCU, who's the Horned Frogs. And the battle cry for that particular game was that we were going to go gigging. We were going to go gig 'em. And it persisted beyond that to be a thing. So that's it. Doesn't quite have the same appeal and catch as hook 'em, does it? But it works for us.
All right. Now you know. Now we know. Who knew? Yeah, we're learning things here in Coach2Scale. Tom, awesome conversation. I'll leave you with the last word. Anything else? Any parting thoughts that you'd like to leave me and our audience with?
It did occur to me as you were recapping what I said about Buzz. It was a lot more analogous to the topic we were discussing earlier than I realized. You're right. Buzz certainly cared about the wins and losses and the outcome, just as every seller, I hope, cares about winning the deal. But he did it in a way that let the players feel like he cared about them as a person, just as I hope that when we're engaging with their buyers, they truly believe that we're there for the right outcome for them. We can very much be interested in a good outcome for us along the way. I guess it goes back to the old Zig Ziglar thing. You can have anything you want as long as you help enough other people get what they want. So it just resonated when you were giving that recap.
Zig Ziglar. Another amazing person in this business. Tom, I think we can leave it right there. I mean, we talked about a lot of stuff, right? Look, we talked about, the avoiding confirmation bias, the importance of frameworks, asking questions the prospects should be asking themselves, right? I.e. consultative selling, the importance of getting buy-in, mutual action plans versus sellers' dream plans. We covered a lot of ground. Awesome conversation. Thanks for bringing it today.
That was a lot of fun, Matt. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. It really was fun.
That's one of the big goals here. Have some fun talking about stuff that's going to be meaningful and impactful to others. So thank you, Tom. Thanks everybody out there for watching and listening. If you're out there on social media, engage. Let us know you're out there. Become part of the community that we're trying to build. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you don't like. Let us know what you'd like to hear more of. Tell us a story that relates to what we're talking about. We want to hear from you. We want to bring content. We want to bring guests to you that helps you do that hard job that you're doing. Just make it a little bit easier. So thanks for tuning in. And until next time, coach them if you want to keep them. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Coach2Scale, How Modern Leaders Build Coaching Cultures. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at coachem.io. That's COACHEM.io. And follow us on Twitter at CoachemNow. See you all next week. Thanks for joining. And remember, coach them if you want to keep them.